I'm Chance.
And I'm Sarah Catherine.
And this is Conservation Connection,
presented by Last Chance Endeavors.
We are a husband and wife team running a wildlife education nonprofit. It's focused on connecting students to their environment.
Each week, here on Conservation Connection, we do just that, introducing you to the groundbreaking science and conservation work that's happening every day across the globe.
We talk to professionals in the world of conservation science and wildlife management, and we ask them about their career,
their current projects,
their wild and crazy stories from the field,
and everything in between.
This episode is a collaboration with EarthX here in Dallas, Texas.
EarthX is the largest Earth Day celebration in the world, and it brings in speakers from every corner of the environmental arena.
Listen in to hear the stories of today's environmental titans, covering everything from environmental law, ocean health, renewable energy, clean transportation, and so much more.
Let's get to the show.
Alrighty guys, welcome to another episode of Conservation Connection. We are here at EarthX 2022. We're sitting in the podcast booth in Dallas, Texas, and I'm very excited for this episode. We are sitting down with Howard Vincent, who is the president and CEO of Pheasant Forever and Quail Forever.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We are so glad that you were able to come be with us on the show today. Let's just hop right into it. What is Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever?
Yeah, so we're a habitat organization. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. We raise dollars locally and we drive those dollars into the ground. So we don't raise and release birds or anything like that, but we have 750 chapters spread across the kind of the lower 48 states. Our chapters raise money through raffles and banquets. And really what's unique about our model is those chapters retain essentially 100% of the net fundraising to deliver that locally. So if you believe all habitat's local, this is your perfect model.
This is quite literally a grassroots organization, right? And that you're very local and you're literally working on restoring and repairing the habitat.
Exactly. You know, our enduring strategies, obviously, as a habitat organization, we're trying to build a bigger and better toolbox. So we do a lot of work in Washington, D.C. Our flagship is the Farm Bill. And if you know about the Farm Bill, it encompasses lunches for schools. It includes huge amount of funding for food stamps and social needs. And a portion of that, a very small slice of that, is called Title II, which is the conservation practices. And there's a program called the Conservation Reserve Program, which would work with local ranchers and farmers and give them some economic value in setting aside lands that should never have been farmed. And we can put that back into native prairie. We can restore those wetlands that have been taken out. And that encompasses at this moment, the ceiling on that is 27 million acres of potential wildlife cover. And so we lobby for that and we fight for that along with other initiatives in Washington, D.C. and in other states. And then we also have a very robust education and outreach. You know, how do we get more kids into the outdoors? How do we get more people enjoying the outdoors? And so that's kind of our three drivers as an organization. But all of those things add up to how can we put more acres in the ground, which at the end of the day, yes, would benefit pheasants and quail, but also benefit soil health, water, monarchs, pollinators, and at this moment, obviously, we're trying to capture carbon.
Right.
And so all of these things stack up as incredible benefits on that landscape if we can really improve that acre.
Yeah, and trees get a lot of the love for being like carbon sequestration, but prairies as well are massive places where you're pulling carbon dioxide out of the air and you're turning it into biomass, which ends up in the soil, and that's the same sequestration, just in a different time scale that trees are doing it.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's places for trees and there's places where trees shouldn't be. And if you think about short or tall grass prairies, trees were never meant to be in that space. And of course, we had natural systems like fire. We had buffalo that roamed those and managed those acres for us.
Yep,
and at that same
free
time, sequestered an incredible amount of carbon.
Yeah.
And if you think about these species, these grass species, these forbs, these wildflowers that are out there in that space, the above ground height might be 2-3 feet high, and below ground is the magic.
Is where the real biomass is.
Right. And you have 12, 15 feet of root systems that sequester that carbon and hold that carbon.
And hold the soil in place, right? So
Absolutely.
it's a whole ecosystem. I think this is the juncture where we're going to do this. Tell me.
Well, I mean, you were going there. I mean, we can grow soil.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely. So as a man who does this professionally, can you give me a quick rundown of the value of prairie systems, which we've kind of already gotten into, and the history of prairie systems in the United States, what they used to look like historically prior to civilization, and what they look like today, and how we're trying to get back to what they used to be?
Yes. So if you think about this landscape, especially, in the central states of the United States, right? Those core states, those are grasslands. We had eastern forests and we have western forests, but in that middle ground, bison roamed and kept those grasslands healthy.
In an early successional state where you don't have these big mature trees, you have grasses that are able to weather these catastrophic events like wildfires or like billions of buffalo walking across them and eating them, right?
Yes, eating it, fertilizing it, managing it, and nature needs disturbance. That's such a natural, and fire is that. Grazing.
It's why we mow our lawns,
right?
We're creating this mini disturbance event every week when you're mowing your lawn, which keeps it in that early successional state of the grasses, as opposed to allowing more woody herbs and stuff to grow in and take control.
And if you think about wildlife that exist in that space, maybe the best example to talk about would be sage grouse. So sage grouse existed in an 11-state region in the Northwest, a native species that lived in that sage steppe, in that grassland that is very and wholly unique. If they have something on their landscape that's over 4 feet high, that now becomes a perch for a raptor and a predator. They will avoid that. So if we've allowed trees to grow up,
even young ones, even tiny ones,
anything over 4 feet high will now disturb those leks, right? Where they come to do their breeding, where they will nest. So we've eliminated by the fact that we haven't allowed fire on the landscape, that we've eliminated mass grazing regimes like bison, trees have grown up. And from a novice, they would say, well, that's beautiful. Trees are growing up in this landscape. Isn't that wonderful? But they were never meant to be, and we are losing wildlife species. And specifically, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service looked at sage grouse as an endangered species. They looked at that. So many groups came together, federal, state, NGO partners came together to try to solve this so this bird would not be listed. We were able to be successful that this bird did not warrant listening because we had a plan forward on how to create more habitats. But the day that the Director of Fish and Wildlife announced that this would not be listed, it changed from this poster child of sage grouse to a sagebrush initiative. And why that's important is the sagebrush initiative holds 350 other species that would have also been endangered. So this is this broad landscape view of the impact that we want to have as an organization, that our partners come together to work on. So
that's something I kind of want to zoom in a little bit more on, or at least reemphasize, because my personal journey is kind of a strange one. I was born loving animals. I always loved animals. When I was 5, my mom was finally like, look, I got to find somebody who knows more about animals because I don't know that I don't have the information that you're looking for. And so I got connected with a raptor rehabilitation center here in Texas called Last Chance Forever, which was very influential on me. But I can remember as a 5-year-old looking at an autopsy of a barred owl that had flown into the window of a house. And up until that point, I had just kind of thought, man, I love animals. I love the owls. I want to, just be around them and learn about them. And seeing this bird that had flown into a house that was built in his forest is the moment that I made the connection that if I love this animal, I have to love its environment. I have to care about where this animal exists every day. I can't love anything in a vacuum. So this initiative where quail forever, pheasant forever is focused on the prairie really resonates with me, because if you're gonna save the quail and the pheasants and you're gonna make sure that they're around forever, you can only do that by caring about the environment in which they live. And not only does that conserve the quail and conserve the pheasants, but it's vital for every other organism, every other species of plant and bug and everything that makes this ecosystem churn and continue to exist. You have to protect the environment, and protecting the environment means protecting everything.
Exactly.
So I assume you aren't going to these environments and just dropping in some buffalo, bison, whatever, and being like, yeah, do your job. You were here before, just, do it, manage it, figure it out. So how are you managing the spaces? I mean, maybe you are dropping in the buffalo, but you tell us what you're doing.
Yeah, we don't get to go backwards. We broke the system, right? And so now what are those tools that we can apply to that landscape that mimic those vast herds that we will never have back? Obviously, there's individuals and ranchers who, do have bison and put them back on the landscape. But if you think about just cattle in general, the grazing regimes are incredibly beneficial. That needs to be managed as well. You can graze inappropriately down to nothing. But if you manage your grazing, you can have great success in ranching. It's economically viable. But at the end of the day, bringing fire back, managed fire, controlled fire burns across a landscape is incredibly beneficial. You can apply interseeding. You can any type of disturbance that you can apply on that landscape. And in the upper Midwest, you need to disturb these landscapes about once every 5 years. In the southern tier of states, it may require you to do it every other year because of the growing season that is in place in a Florida or Texas versus a Minnesota or
where it gets really cold for a big chunk of the year. Yeah.
So all of those things apply, and you can have, from a ranching or a farming perspective, you can do this right, and you can apply those tools that can benefit pollinators and monarchs. And, let's just go to water, right? If we did everything right for water, we would be way down the road on, I think, success in our nature and wildlife and what we need on that landscape. If you think about farming, practices have gone again from row ditch to row ditch or right up to the stream. And so as these farmers are growing, and we need to feed fuel and fiber a world, and we understand that, but there's some acres that shouldn't be farmed, especially those that should better be served as buffers along streams and rivers. We need to keep our soil in place so we can grow great things. We also need to keep the chemicals in place. They're put on that landscape for a purpose to grow those crops. If they run off, that's a challenge. And if you look at just the Mississippi River Basin, it encompasses 36 states. And the result is we have epoxy occurring in the Gulf of Mexico in an incredible dead zone. That's a direct result.
Acres of the Gulf of Mexico where the outflow of the Mississippi River is, because the nitrogen fertilizer and the other synthetic fertilizers that are just causing a disruption in that ecosystem.
Right. And so many of the farmers are improving their practices. They're using no-till practices out there on that landscape. But there's a lot of producers out there, and they need tools. And that's part of that Farm Bill, those conservation tools that are in those federal programs and state programs that would actually give some economic incentive for a landowner to take land out of production, again, that probably never should have been farmed because it's highly erodible, poor soil types, and we can put buffers in and we can hold our soil and keep our water clean. And at the same time, it does provide wildlife benefits, whether that's for pheasants or quail, or again, pollinators or monarchs.
Right.
It's not a complicated system, but you have to pay attention to it.
Right. And going back to what you said earlier, we broke that system. And the system that was in place was that we had these vast grasslands, right? These are our prairies. When we're talking about a prairie, it's just a mature grassland is basically what we're talking about. And every couple of years, this grassland would either burn in a wildfire or would be grazed down pretty low and trampled by buffalo, bison. And that disturbance is what prevented trees and other scrub brush from growing up and turning it from a grassland into a forest like we have on the east or the west coast. Well, we came in and we said, no, I don't want everything to be set on fire. No, I don't want these vast herds to be just moving freely. This is my land. I'm going to put out any fires that start on it, and I'm going to put up a fence so that I can keep my cattle here in this pasture. And so rather than having these herds, which were nomadic, they traveled all throughout the Great Plains and they spread out that impact over time, we changed it to a system where I have my head of cattle on this land and they're here year after year after year after year. And that's not what the prairies, they can recover fast, but they can't recover from consistent grazing over and over and over. So that's the system that we're trying to get back in place, is this periodic disruption that allows a mature grassland to continue to exist as opposed to turning into a more forested state or scrubbier state.
Right. And I think we need to be really clear with our listeners and talk about controlled fire. We're not talking about wildfires that we've experienced out west,
which is a completely different thing.
Yeah. Well, what you've seen is old growth forests who have never been managed. And now the fires that have occurred in that space are intense fires that burn root systems, that leave a charred landscape.
Just scour the land.
And the result is you now have invasives that move in more quickly, cheatgrass, which has no wildlife benefit, no grazing benefits at all. And it's a difficult task to manage for those type of species that have been invasive, where when you have controlled fires in a managed landscape, these are low heat fires. You're burning a surface, you're burning that grass, that thatch, that buildup, but you're holding those root systems intact that are going to sprout and grow again naturally. So finding that balance between those things, which means we still have old growth forests that are in danger, and we've seen, beetle infestations. We've seen all these results of unhealthy forests. So we need to manage those as well, and there's different tools to do that, including the lumber industry. At some point, we want new growth forests, and it's not a black and white issue where we take every tree down and then we go plant new trees. There's a management and succession of taking some, planting more. That would be kind of the best view forward.
Yeah. So I'm glad that you brought up like forest fires and wildfires, because I've kind of had this question on my mind that you might be able to answer. Obviously, we don't like forest fires and wildfires. We wish that the management was in place that those would never happen. But since they are happening and they're coming through and basically burning these landscapes down, do you think it's possible after these fires go through for those lands to be managed properly starting now? Is that something we can do, or is it kind of too late?
We have to do that. And it's not an easy fix. The money you could save managing these landscapes is 1/10 of what it's cost to fix them. And that's the challenge, whether it's our federal partners at Fish and Wildlife Service or the Forest Service, establishing budgets to manage those landscapes before they're broken. And there's an example, there's a bill that has passed the committees in the House and Senate called Recovering America's Wildlife Act, and the RAWA is the acronym. And at this moment, that would be $1.4 billion a year that would go back to states to help prevent the listing of endangered species. Again, this is just a drop in the bucket to prevent species from being listed, doing the right things on that landscape, because once they're listed, the cost becomes astronomical to bring them back. And those that are living on that space, ranchers, farmers who have that wildlife, are now constrained. So their livelihoods are now at risk. We can prevent this, but there does need to be investment on the front side to fix this. So really, to your question, we can manage forests appropriately before they burn. After they burn, we still need to correct those, and we can do that, but it's incredibly expensive. And the damage that's done to that soil and to that runoff, we're back to exposed earth that's now going to run off into our streams, imperil fish, cold water streams. I mean, the ripple effect of this travesty is immense.
I want to go back to something that's come up twice now where we're talking about trying to prevent a species from being listed. And I just think it's important to point out that that is a good thing. We don't want species to be listed. Yes, the species that are in peril need to be protected. But if we can prevent a species from becoming imperiled to the point that they have to have these restrictions placed on them, that's a huge win, right? So I think there's oftentimes confusion when you hear like, oh, so-and-so species came off of the endangered species list. That's almost always a good thing because
that's a wonderful thing.
It means that they have recovered to the point that they no longer need these really invasive restrictions on what can happen to or around that species.
So again, let's fix something before it breaks in its entirety, right? Let's provide enough resources and enough habitat and the things that those species need before they're required to be endangered or to be listed. So let's fix this on the front side. And we have that ability and we have that knowledge and that base and the residual benefits. And, we could all point at a species and say, who cares about the snail darter? Well, maybe nobody does, but it's that canary in the coal mine. This is just an indicator species that there's something wrong on that landscape. And if you look at that, again, that sage grouse species, this iconic bird, which is just an incredible species in itself, that is the indicator for those 350 other species. If that bird were to have been listed, there would have been a listing for 350 other species as well, because it really wasn't about just the bird. It was about that landscape and how imperiled that whole landscape was. So and we're looking at the lesser prairie chickens. We're looking at the monarch butterfly. These are species that are at 10% of their historic population base. And, the monarch butterfly is this poster child in every single elementary school, right? That natural process that from larvae to the metamorphic to this beautiful monarch butterfly. It's a wonderful geography story, right? Because
they're migratory.
Right, they're migratory, and they come from the edge of Canada all the way to Mexico in these journeys and then return. And it's just a fascinating story to watch. And at the end of the day, they need milkweed, right?
Yep.
99% of those lay their eggs in milkweed. There's probably 4 or 5 different species of milkweed.
But they're all very closely related.
Very.
Yep.
And it's something so easily fixed and so easily adaptable, whether it's in your garden, in your yard, or whether it's the edge of our highways. If you think about our right-of-way systems, and, we can look at, we're here in Dallas at the moment, and we're kind of at the end of Highway 35, which runs north-south, and it runs all the way up to Duluth, Minnesota, is where 35
Oh, wow, I did not know that.
Right, and there's my hometown, right? So there's my connectivity to this all the way to Dallas
Yes.
and further in. But that corridor is Monarch Central.
Yeah, they travel right down the center of the U.S.
So let's do something with those roadsides. We've historically put in monoculture grasses that are easily mowed and easily taken care of. With just a little more thought, we could put in pollinator mixes and we could add milkweed on those edges, and it would benefit ground nesting birds, and it would benefit all wildlife. It would hold water better. If we change lanes and said, look, we spent 100 years trying to move water off of our landscape and accelerate it into our rivers to move it, and it hasn't been effective. We continue to have floods because we can't compete with Mother Nature at that level. Now we recognize we need to slow water down. We need to hold water in natural systems, right? You can't do it. We've proven in New Orleans, you can't prove it and protect it with concrete, right? Mother Nature's too big, but we can with natural systems, right?
So the whole point with that is that you're trying to slow the water down so that rather than traveling across the surface of the land, it percolates down through the soil and enters into aquifers and groundwater systems, so that rather than carrying chemicals and stuff across and straight into the river systems, it gets filtered out by the soil, and B, it doesn't move the soil itself, that surface level, and strip away that really highly nutritious soil that plants need to grow in. It makes its way down into the bedrock. That's
right,
the
and
whole
we need to replenish aquifers. We're realizing that some communities can no longer grow from an economic standpoint because they don't have a water system that is being regenerated fast enough. All of these things play in. How do we put back those sponges that were naturally on our landscape? In the upper United States, the prairie pothole region, our agricultural community at some point decided we should drain those, and they've put in tiles, move that water into river systems so they can plant more corn, more soybean, more wheat. And at some level, we encourage that behavior as a government, as a people. There's a balance there. We do need to feed people and clothe people, but there's a balance. We should be farming the best, and then we should be protecting the rest is kind of the easy little drumbeat there. But all of that also relates to water. If we're in these climate extremes where if we have extreme water, we have flooding, and when we have no water, we have droughts, and it's impacting our growers as well. There's a middle ground here. If we can use no-till systems that hold water better, again, grow soil that's more healthy, we can mitigate those extremes that are happening on that landscape. And, we've proven that it works. Now we need more of those producers to adopt those programs.
Yep, absolutely. One of the things that I just want to take a minute to recognize is that in this episode, I have heard exactly what we've been trying to tell people is that there are so many ways to help the planet. You can be a scientist who's studying the sage grouse and learning that, if there's something that's 4 feet tall or taller, they're not going to be in this space, right? That was a scientist that discovered that and disseminated that information. There's policymakers that say, okay, these are the rules that we're going to put in place for our communities. There are advocates who talk to those policymakers and are the link between the scientist and the people making the rules. There's people like us that are disseminating the information to the public. There are so many ways to intersect and interact with this problem that it doesn't matter what your skill set is, as long as you use that skill set to help protect this planet that we live on.
Absolutely. I think to love something, you have to experience it. Get outside. We've seen this, coming out of COVID, where people had now the opportunity and time to social distance and, going kind of nutty in the house for so long. We have more people outside fishing, more people outside hunting, more people outside hiking and camping in that space. And now they're going to fall in love with it. They're going to want to come back, and we do need to create more access for people. I think we need to, tell this story, and you're sure doing that. Incredibly appreciative. But there's little things that you can do, whether that's planting milkweeds, maybe on the edge of your yard to create a little bit of stopover for these monarchs that are traveling north and south, across our landscape. So there's so many little things that you can do. You can use your education and passion in the conservation space. I would challenge you to get out and be a volunteer, find something you love, whatever that is, and whoever that's with, you'll get more back than you could ever give.
Absolutely. And before we wrap up here today, I would love for you to highlight your education program, especially for our teachers and students that are listening to this episode. Tell us a little bit about it and where they could find more information on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those teachers and those school systems out there, absolutely go out to pheasantsforever.org or quailforever.org. We have a robust education outreach initiative. If you would like a pollinator acre at your school, we can provide the resources for you to do that, the tools, the seeds. This is an opportunity to get all the kids in that classroom outside broadcasting seeds and something that they can own for the rest of their lives, something they can come back and visit. And we've done hundreds of these. We can be mentors, whether that means taking classrooms outside. We also have a lot of individuals who love bird dogs, right? And you want to get kids excited? Let's bring a bird dog out there and show them what are the kind of the natural things out there. But almost any excuse to get our kids outside and experience that it's not a place to be feared or afraid of. We know it's new and we know it's unique for so many kids, especially in an urban environment. but there's so many acres, millions of acres of our public lands that are available, not just our parks in our inner city, but refuges, wildlife management areas, waterfowl production areas, especially out, in the western United States. About, over half that land is open to the public, and it's yours to explore and yours to experience. Take advantage of that.
100%. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us. We really appreciate it. And this has been an awesome episode. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Conservation Connection.
If you enjoyed our podcast, go ahead and subscribe to make sure you catch every episode that we post.
We'd love to hear from you. So if you want to reach out, go to our website, lastchanceendeavors.com/contact, and shoot us an email.
We love questions from our listeners, so if you heard something that you want to know more about, be sure to let us know.
If you've got a minute to spare, leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts will help other conservation-minded people find the show. We'd really appreciate it.
A big thanks to the people working to protect our planet, and a big thanks to you for listening. Don't forget to tune in next week.